The President of the United States has a pretty nice airplane, his own helicopter. He's got the nuclear codes, lives in a pretty nice house. There's really not much reason to question whether he is running the country. But here's a tweet from the 45th president in response to the emerging media narrative. "I call my own shots," says President Trump, largely based on accumulation of data. Everyone knows it. Some fake news media, in order to marginalize, lies. Now, what was the president reacting to? Well, in recent days, there's been a flurry of attention paid to Steve Bannon, his chief White House strategist. It was the Time cover story, master or chief or great manipulator, SNL had Bannon as Darth Vader actually running the government. Morning Joe was talking about Bannon's large role. And the New York Times had a piece about staff disarray, which said that perhaps President Trump, according to the Times' sources, hadn't been fully briefed on an executive order that reorganized the National Security Council and gave Bannon a seat on that council. So Trump felt compelled to push back, and he's been pushing back against the media in all kinds of ways, repeatedly taking on the failing New York Times. Failing is his formulation. Obviously, the paper says its subscriptions are at an all-time high. But there was also this. Any negative polls are fake news, just like the CNN, ABC, NBC polls in the election. Sorry, people want border security and extreme vetting. Now, this is really striking because I remember during the campaign, all through the primaries, Donald Trump loved polls. He was always citing the most favorable polls when he was leading by a lot, as he would say, in many, many primary states. And in the general election, the polls tightened up. Polls showed Hillary was ahead. Then he started to criticize the polls or didn't talk about the polls. Obviously, he ended up winning. Now, there are all kinds of problems with polls. Sometimes they are off. Sometimes they are wrong. Sometimes they are not a full snapshot. Some people don't want to participate. People maybe don't want to say they like Donald Trump. But when you talk about all the major news organizations, including Fox, hiring professional pollsters to take these surveys, I mean, they're not fake news. And when many of these polls find a similar result that tells you at least some approximate idea of the direction or the mood of the country. The ironic thing here about Trump tweeting about fake news and fake polls is that the polls on this question of temporary ban on refugees, a temporary halt to any citizens coming in from those 7 predominantly Muslim countries, is that the polls aren't bad for him. 49% in the Gallup poll said they approve of his policy. 41%, I believe, said they did not approve. And so that is very different from the, I would say, 90% of negative coverage of this, that this was something that has sparked all these protests, that Trump has gone too far, that the courts are going to rein him in. We shall see about that. But I think it reflects a kind of a frustration that the president has still in the early weeks of the administration with a skeptical to hostile media narrative, with polls that he doesn't like, although I would say, again, they're not that bad, at least on this question of the refugee temporary ban. And also on this notion that, other people, particularly Steve Bannon, maybe have an outsized influence and not the president of the United States. I think it's fine for the president to push back against what he sees as unfair or biased news coverage. But if he does this constantly, again and again and again and again, I think it loses some of its punch. And therefore, it's a little bit less unique, a little bit less newsworthy when he does take on egregious examples of bad reporting or bad journalism.